Some games are sacred. They were either so well received or so revolutionary that any criticism towards the game is sacrilege. They're the games that people claim haven't aged, the games people say are still the best to this day. Sometimes when I play a game like that, I think, what the hell are they on about? I'll likely find things to enjoy, but I'll still be skeptical that this is the best. Spider-Man 2 was one of those sacred cows. People for years, up until the release of Insomniac Spider-Man games, have claimed that Spider-Man 2 for the 6th generation of consoles is the best open-world Spider-Man game to ever exist. And you know what? I get it. I played the game when I was a kid, but it wasn't until last year that I gave it a proper replay, and I was expecting to see a game that aged poorly, played poorly, and I didn't. Look, is this better than some of the latest Spider-Man games? Not entirely. Is it my favorite Spider-Man game? Sorry, but no one's beating Ultimate. But if anyone were to tell me that this is the best Spider-Man game, I wouldn't question them. After, brace yourself, 20 years, looking at this game can teach us a lot of lessons. Outside of how revolutionary it was, the game still does some things better than even the latest Spider-Man games, and that alone warrants a deeper look at Spider-Man 2. Now I need to make something clear. I'm a big Spider-Man guy, okay? And those biases are clear no matter where you look on the channel. But despite being the #1 Peter Parker Pickled Pepper Pecker Glazer, I have no nostalgia for this game. I grew up playing a lot of these games, but this one never stuck as hard as Ultimate did. By the time I was old enough to really appreciate the game though, I didn't have a console capable of playing it. Now, going back to it, I was expecting something a lot worse than what we have. I became skeptical when seeing that people were comparing Spider-Man 2018 to this game, but, and sorry to give it away so early, those people are right to do so. The swinging genuinely is really good, the combat is surprisingly deep, and the game itself is just plain fun. It's not all perfect, but if the goal is to answer the question, is this game as good as they say? The answer is, yeah, pretty much. I'd say visuals are where this game ages most, but even here, while not winning any awards for fidelity, the game looks great in terms of style. New York at night is a constant mosaic of lit up windows as if the life of the city glistens at all hours. During the day, it's admittedly less impressive, and the higher clarity does expose some of the more undesirable issues with pop-in, but generally, things look great here. I know this is easy to say since I'm playing on an emulator where everything is upscaled, but I assure you, what I say rings true when playing natively on a PS2. When it comes to games like this, where fidelity can't be properly judged by today's standards, the best thing we can do is look at what it needed to accomplish. Does it look like a Spider-Man game? Is it recognizable as Spider-Man 2? And is everything up to a standard that I subjectively determine? The answer is yes to all of those. Design-wise, I love the look of this game and the characters within it. The design for the Rhino is gorgeous, and Black Cat's design is downright... Damn. Let's ignore the way it's better than its successor and look at how it sounds better too. The soundtrack for this game is heat from start to finish, and while that's not surprising by now, what is surprising is the voice acting, which is rough across the board. I love Tobey Maguire, but he's not going to be winning any awards here. I don't want to outright call it bad, because there are some lines here that feel believable, but there's an equal amount that sound as though he's phoning it in, at times, literally.
I think that's the 3rd time JJ's fired me this week. Thanks, Mr. Aziz.
Despite this, and call it nostalgia, but these lines are iconic in many ways. They have this campiness to them that makes it a lot of fun, like those spoken by the Rhino.
I'm gonna break your bones and make you cry for your mama.
Alfred Molina presents a better performance, and the replacement they got for James Franco turned out great too. But the real ear candy is when you're swinging. The music perfectly captures the essence of the films. The sounds of the wind zipping past you at top speed is immersive, and the sound of the webs being shot is oh so satisfying. In this moment to moment, the game is a force to be reckoned with. In other instances, it becomes some of the funniest gaming moments I've had in a while. I imagine returning to this game would be less fun than Spider-Man 3 because the animations in that game were hilarious, but I was sorely mistaken because this game has its share of hilarity too. Let's look at the brutality on display because my god, people get battered here. In the opening clip, we can see a mugging where a woman is beaten over the head and you can hear the impact.
I got her!
Man, she is fucking dead! In a later segment of the game, Peter gets his head crushed into a wall with stellar style, and you know what this segment of the game showcases even better? The ragdolls. If hit hard enough, Peter will be knocked over, and my god, this is the funniest way to punish a player for messing up. Some of these had me laughing out loud, not just in the absurdity of it, but in how brutal they can be. Touching the water during this fight is an instant game over, and when a boss can toss you around this hard and end your run this fast, I can't help but laugh. This isn't exclusive to canned animations either. The physics alone will see Peter swung around by the Rhino for minutes on end. Other interactions see you getting bounced multiple times off of a shockwave, and while the interactions aren't necessarily as funny as Spider-Man 3, it's hard to compare because one interaction is completely organic, and the other is a scripted event that was likely meant to be taken a bit more seriously than it was. I think we see moments like these in today's games because the standards call for a higher level of polish. You can't have ragdolls anymore because they inherently lead to some jank. And while it's not often I encourage taking control away from the player, I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to see their return. Discontinuing ragdolls installs is just one way games are moving towards being more sophisticated. But the strongest evidence for this argument is the thing people love to fight about: web swinging. When people talk about good web swinging, Spider-Man 2 is often the first to be brought up. Both of them. These two games operate on opposite sides of the spectrum between physics-based swinging and animation-based swinging. But the archaic way we've approached swinging in the past doesn't apply to the same extent anymore. Instead of defining swinging by whether the animations influence the physics or if the physics influence the animations, let's instead define it by cinematics and control. This is ideal because Insomniac Spider-Man 2 has physics-based swinging, sort of. You can gain speed realistically and lose it too, but you can also at will defy physics depending on the moves you're pulling off. Insomniac Spider-Man is positioned to the far right of the spectrum, where a smooth swinging experience is prioritized high above a realistic experience. The animations are fluid, transition seamlessly, and when it comes to making the swinging moment to moment look like a movie, it's arguably unmatched. On the far left of the spectrum is Activision's Spider-Man 2, where we have physics that are realistic with a few reasonable omissions, and swinging that better puts you in the headspace of Spider-Man, but without the same cinematic flair that Insomniac provides. The issue with this system is that for the inexperienced player, it'll take a while before it looks good, and for a 4-hour game, that can be a problem. The reason for bringing up both of these is that Spider-Man 2, both of them, are often at the top of people's list when it comes to swinging, and my argument is that comparing them makes no sense because they are fundamentally different. There are immense strengths with both ends, and neither is, in my opinion, better, but we've seen a clear shift from the swinging of Activision Spider-Man to Insomniac Spider-Man, and I believe there's a reason why. More control is great, assuming it looks good. Unfortunately, when it comes to many of these older games, it's difficult to make it look skillful and fluid. Gamers want to achieve that, but not everyone has the time to do so. For every well-done swing is one that was cut short by a brick wall, and the solution is to have the game put varying degrees of training wheels on the movement to raise the skill floor. But as we continue to do this, the skill ceiling gets impacted. We saw a similar shift in Assassin's Creed, where the first few games had excellent movement, but there was always an element of jank to it, and it didn't always look smooth. Ubisoft's solution was typically to take control away from the player. With each entry, you had less freedom, but with each entry, the animations look nicer, and games like Unity had a flow to them that the Ezio games couldn't achieve. As we continue further, we end up with the RPG games, where a once defining aspect of the series is dedicated to a single button. Fortunately, Spider-Man has been spared from that fate, but we still have a system that holds players' hands arguably more than it needs to, and you know what? It worked. When the newer games take less effort to achieve a cinematic show of skill, the player ego is heightened. Something I noticed pretty quickly in regards to fans of the Insomniac games is that they think they're better than they are. Just look at the way they interact with each other. The Insomniac swinging is good, it truly is, but it's not hard. Spider-Man 2 brought some more challenge, and I think it's great, but it eventually led to a system that is at odds with itself. But we can save that deep dive for the Spider-Man 2 video you guys actually want to see. The point is, now that we're accustomed to a system that does so much of the work for us, returning to the older games can be a challenge, but once you move past the obvious technical shortcomings and focus on improving, the system reaches its full potential. And while the footage on screen doesn't make me look the best, I can confidently say that most of the time the game looks janky because of player error. This isn't to say that just because something is difficult it can't be criticized. That's how you end up with FromSoft fans who are still stuck learning the attack patterns for talking to women. But there is plenty of jank here, such as when climbing up a wall, the game will snap the camera behind you, causing you to, if still holding the stick forward, jump right off. The movement itself can be stiff at times, especially when outside of the swing. Games like Ultimate Spider-Man, despite stripping down the freedom of movement, did provide a smoother experience. As this game's position on the spectrum would have you believe, you have a lot of control over how you move. You can shoot out a web, and wherever Peter is facing is where he will try to attach to. And with this alone, there are things to consider. Are you close enough to the building you want to swing from? If you're not close enough, then you'll be scraping the ground. Is this building positioned in a way for you to utilize it to your advantage? If not, you'll eat a brick wall. Once firing the first line, you can jump off to complete the swing or seamlessly shoot out another web with your free hand and swing on both or let go of one, and the choice continues past that, such as utilizing wall running, jumping, web zipping, pole swinging. It's genuinely stunning that this is where modern swinging started, because the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man game had swinging like this. I almost wish this open world and the swinging were available in that first game, because learning to swing perfectly mirrors the movies. The first time you try it, you're gonna slam into a wall. You might take the safer route of swinging with two hands at a time, but as you progress, you'll be incorporating different moves into your arsenal, even some air tricks, and before you know it, the many micro decisions that swinging demands will become second nature. Speed is always something I desire in a game like this, and I'm a little disappointed that swing speed along with other moves are locked behind progression, because I feel as though the swinging and my grasp on it isn't fulfilled until halfway through the game. And when a playthrough is 4 hours, that means I only have 2 hours with the game before I'm done the story. Being able to restart the story with my upgrades would have been appreciated, but at least there is a variety of side content to keep players engaged. There are 3 different movement-based side activities, but they are all essentially races. Delivering pizzas needs you to hit a few spots before returning to the parlor. The MJ missions see you speeding to an objective across a map, and the races are actually races without some thinly veiled objective. The official races are the best of these, as they require you to engage with the movement in unique ways and function as a tutorial for some of the more complex mechanics. Something else I noticed as Spider-Man games went on is that the amount of races continued to dwindle, with Insomniac Spider-Man 2 having no races at all. I realize that this video may seem like a hit piece on Insomniac Spider-Man 2, but what I'm trying to say is that a game like this still has value because it provides things the current products don't, and as such, we can look to those games to see what the new products can add or improve on in their inevitable sequels. I won't sit here and credit Spider-Man 2 for something it never did. For example, I've seen people say that the Batman Arkham games took inspiration from the combat in this game, and some even credited it as being the origins of the free flow combat system, and my god, where the fuck is that coming from? Look, the combat in this game is exceptional, but let's not put the game on a pedestal, especially when it doesn't need it. Where this game has strengths over other Spider-Man games is that webs are given proper utility. Webs are a difficult thing to seamlessly incorporate in combat, and often they act as a means of holding enemies or subduing them. Here, you can use the webs for that purpose still, but it can also be used to turn the enemies themselves into a weapon, swinging them around like a wrecking ball. Weapons can be yoinked out of their hands, making formidable foes with guns more manageable, and of course, it's always fun to bully thugs by throwing them up in the air and letting the concrete do the rest. The funniest encounters are always those that take place on a rooftop because you can just toss them off to their non-lethal infinite sleep glitch. I appreciate the focus meter, which makes incoming attacks easier to spot, as it helped me a lot during the early game, and I further appreciated that enemies were always ramping up in complexity. First there are goons, and there are goons who learn to block, then some with shock weapons, grenades, mechs, and more. It's a solid variety, and the combat moment to moment, while never being a perfect experience, not being able to dodge more than one attack at a time resulted in more hits than I'd like to admit. The boss fights were still a good time. The Rhino is a good test of players' knowledge of dodging and countering, and being able to beat on him after the fight is fun too.
Find a safer line of work.
I'm getting dizzy.
I guess that's the strange invisible quality about the game, the fun factor. The final fight against Otto isn't great, he's simple to take down, just dodge, web, attack, but missing means you get to feast your eyes on the ensuing chaos. Getting battered and ragdolled around, even though I'm losing, was just fun. Even when I lost a race over and over, I retried over and over because it was fun, and 99% of the time I failed because of my shortcomings, and being able to trust a system like this makes striving for improvement an addicting process. General level design is good too, and you'll be doing plenty of things within smaller environments and the open world. New York is a city that feels about as alive as it could be. There are 2 kinds of events, one that appears seamlessly, this is a group of 2 to 4 people mugging someone, a balloon going missing, something small that you can do while on the way to other objectives, and then there are events that are initiated by talking to someone, in which they will, in a manner as stiff as me when Black Cat shows up, telling you about a crime happening nearby. Sometimes it's a carjacking, sometimes it's a boat sinking, someone's gonna fall, there's a shootout, a mugging, no matter what, it's varied. Further within these, or any mission for that matter, one of the seamless crimes can pop up, meaning I would at times catch a balloon and hand it back to a kid as I handled some thugs, or mid-pizza delivery, I'd stop some goons. Speaking of gooning, the missions with Black Cat were a ton of fun, especially her final encounter where you get to race her across a map. Each time you follow her, you've improved, and so is she, eventually swinging with a grappling hook, which is relatable because during her segments I'm shooting ropes too. And once both of you are near your peak, you have a final race as a test of your movement capabilities. Fighting alongside her in combat is also an interesting dynamic, as are the many interactions with Mysterio, which out the gate take you to the Statue of Liberty, and eventually ends in an epic boss fight that I can't bring myself to spoil. You may have noticed that the game doesn't necessarily follow the same path as the movie, and while in some games like Spider-Man 3 that worked against the game, it was handled well here. The difference is that the game only focuses on a few subplots instead of bouncing around 10 different stories, and the side stories preserve the spirit of the movie. A major theme in Spider-Man 2 is Peter struggling with balancing Spider-Man and Peter Parker, and the ultimate resentment that comes from being Spider-Man and the stress it puts on him. This is presented through Peter temporarily losing his powers, but that wouldn't translate to a game well, so the side characters that accompany us help to communicate these ideas instead. The beginning of the game sees Peter's friends angry at him for being flaky, his teachers telling him he's gonna fail his classes, and Mr. Aziz is as harsh as ever. Everything surrounding Peter Parker is in shambles because of Spider-Man, and I believe that Peter takes solace in the mask. It's a time to get away for a bit. Feel appreciated. But what happens when you aren't appreciated in that other life? What happens when that persona is put under scrutiny too? Where do you run? When swinging through the streets, people will call out saying that they love you, but just as many will plead for you to get a job. The hate gets to Peter, and when Quentin Beck challenges him in front of thousands, I believe he proved him wrong because he needed the ego boost. It's also where Black Cat comes in, as she encourages Peter to not bother meddling with, as she puts it, mere mortals. The problem is, Spider-Man is ultimately human, and he desires that normal life. And if he didn't, he'd feel so frustrated seeing everyone moving forward without him. Spider-Man is special because he's human. His adventures with Kat are a way to showcase his frustration without taking away his powers, even if that means ranting to her almost every time they meet. By the time this portion of the game is dealt with, we can move on to the more fun set pieces like fighting Otto on the train and taking down the Shocker. I appreciated that these high-octane moments are interwoven throughout the story, so the game remains engaging once it picks up. Admittedly, it does take about an hour for said story to really start moving, but once it does, it's quite good for what it aims to achieve. It's not the best story in a Spider-Man game, but it's good enough, and for a game like this, I think that's all it needs to be. I do wish the game was longer, but given that 4 hours was pretty average for Spider-Man games at the time, I don't want to hold it against the game. Ultimately, returning to Spider-Man 2 was a blast, because not only is it incredibly fun, but it also showcases how far we've come in the last 2 decades. It's incredible how consistent Spider-Man games have been, and while the move towards systems that hold your hand in the name of fulfilling a power fantasy are divisive, I can at least appreciate that each game for those reasons feels unique. I hope that Insomniac or the next developers to take a crack at the character allow more freedom in the movement, and really allow a player who is bad at the movement to look bad. Unfortunately, swing assist settings won't get us there, but I also respect if I'm in the minority with this one. At this point, I've talked about almost all open world Spider-Man games at some point, and I feel like in some ways I missed out on how great these games were when I was a kid. I didn't know much about why I thought these games were good or why they were fun, simply that they were or they weren't. But now I'm in a far more fortunate position, and I actually have the game for the PS2 despite it being a bit of a difficult find. Getting your hands on some of these older Spider-Man games isn't as simple as buying a copy from Amazon, but whenever I acknowledge the idea of a game being a slight pain to get your hands on, there's always someone in the comments saying that you can simply buy a physical copy. While this is true, I, one, know not everyone has the money to spend on a console and a game when the alternative is to emulate it for free, and I know people don't have the time to dedicate to tracking one of them down from a trusted seller. I've always had pretty bad luck when buying things secondhand, so if I can't easily buy something like this, I'll emulate it no problem. That said, I actually am fortunate enough to have both this game and a PS2 handy, but even then, in order to capture said footage, I would need to convert the AV signal to HDMI, run that through my capture card, at which point I'm playing with a significant delay, and then that's assuming the disc has no scratches or anything that could cause skips or freezing, and the point is, I'm not dumb. I see the appeal of emulation, and all the footage on screen is emulated. So do I recommend you return to this game? 1000%. If you can get past the looks, I genuinely believe you'll find yourself enjoying it just as much as the newer games, even if for different reasons. Especially with how easy it is to emulate the game, I think any Spider-Man fan would be wise to play this, and frankly, most of the older games. Yes, reluctantly that includes you, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Fucking fraud. You know, I wish I had something different to say. It would probably make for a more interesting video if I came up with a million reasons why this game was never that good, but honestly, it is. It really is one of the best Spider-Man games we have, and it really is worth the time. I've also been told that Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions and Edge of Time were good too. And let's just say, I hope those people are right. Thank you for watching, and if you want to support the channel, get videos early, and have your name on screen too, you can head over to our Patreon page. Thank you for everything, and take care.